technology is a tool. You bring it in when it's needed. But in the end, it's people that needs to say, this is a problem.
Payment risk is one of the biggest risks the exporter faces.
Trust is your most valuable currency.
So the biggest barrier, I think, is the correct use of information between different siloed areas.
I think our panel is a very nice follow-up to the previous panel discussion. And I would like to explore a bit more how the convergence of digital innovation and logistics infrastructure can actually transform fragmented agriculture supply chains into seamless, equitable pathways for producers to reach global consumers. And I hope that my panel of experts today, welcome again, will have some actionable insights to share with us on bridging the gap between the field and the market to create a more transparent, efficient, and interconnected future for global trade. I was planning to start with Dr. Sami. Can you hear us now? Or can we hear you? Okay, then I will go over to Michelle in order to set the scene. What, in your opinion, are the biggest barriers preventing producers from connecting efficiently with consumers today? And how do you think technology can help?
Hello, everyone, and thank you. Lovely to join you all. I think for me, the biggest issue is that we don't see the picture end to end. So when you look at from farm to fork, there's many players in between. So seeing the full value stream of from the end to the beginning to the end with everything that happens in between is, I think, what is missing, because that misses information. So the biggest barrier, I think, is the correct use of information between different siloed areas. My background is I'm an economist, and I love process. I think process is the solution to the world. So if you unpack step by step in each area what happens, then you can immediately start seeing what is the information that needs to flow and what's the data that needs to flow. And that then brings about common pain points, and it generates opportunities. So when you see a problem, you can start generating opportunities to resolve those issues. And the enabling technology, stepping back to the previous conversation, is AI and analytics, which will help you cross some of those bridges. Internet of Things and automation. And then, of course, my personal favorite is blockchain. Having digital platforms to cross over between silos. And very, very important, I almost want to say umbrella over everything, is data verification. So good data gives good information, connects people, connects value streams, delivers the results.
Great, Michelle. I always I like the definition good data. Maybe we can probably write another book about that, what good data is. Thank you so much for setting the scene. Gian, I hope you can hear us because I don't see you anymore. In your opinion, new startups are entering the agri-logistics and the food trading space. They rarely have their own warehouses or any delivery fleets. How can new trading companies utilize third-party logistics or shared hubs to establish more access to the market without massive upfront capital? And perhaps you also want to give us a little bit of background on where that opinion comes from. You're muted.
Okay, right now. So actually, when you're a brand new general trading startup,
I feel like we're entering
storage
the
warehouse overnight.
technical issues.
Am I
Can you just start over again, please?
Okay. So when you are a brand new general trading startup, you quickly realize you cannot buy a fleet of trucks or build a cold storage warehouse overnight. So the capital investment is just too high for a startup. So our approach is to be completely asset light. We look at collaboration rather than ownership. So by partnering with existing specialized third-party logistic providers who already have the warehousing and the cold chains established, we can focus on what we do best, which is sourcing quality food stuff and beverages and finding buyers. For new startups, leveraging shared logistic networks is the ultimate equalizer, which allows us startups to compete and move products efficiently without the heavy overheads.
Yes, I guess that all goes back to when, when farmers originally created some kind of cooperatives, right? It's always easier to gain governance if you cluster yourself together.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Sami, I'm not sure if you're hearing us, so I will continue with our Sam. Welcome again, and moving forward towards, let's say, trust, transparency, and digital verification. What do you believe or do you believe trust and risk infrastructure are becoming just as important as physical infrastructure in connecting producers and global markets?
Yeah, well, I think one thing which we have seen in the cross-border space is presently the kind of risk mitigation capabilities which are available to large businesses. Let's say, leaders like Cargill, Olam, Louis Dreyfus are not available for small SME exporters and importers. And that is where there's a trust deficit, and somehow they are not able to bridge that gap, trust. Even though, when we talk about agriculture infrastructure or we talk about market access, is always about, port, logistics, and, earlier question you were asking, Gian, was also about, bringing the infrastructure in place, which is very, very physical in nature. But then we have, in more or less, we will see there are three silos, which are actually working, when we come to trade, especially cross-border trade. We have one silo, which is information regarding the physical flow of the goods. So we could call it, everything which is related to goods, how they're flowing in warehouses, in vessels, in liners, in trucks. That is very, very, very related information. Then we have financial information, which is in terms of payments, in terms of underwriting data, counterparty risk, a lot of information related to financial risk, even market risk, which are there in these trades. And then you have, information about how the transaction is structured, aspects which are related to purely information regarding contract, regarding quality of the product which has been transacted, what is how it has been verified, what is the change in the quality as it's being moving from one place to another. Those elements which we covered in the last session in traceability, all those have come together. But if you look at all these three silos, they are being driven by different players, and that's why this data is in these silos is not able to come together to provide one seamless, ability for the participants to come and address risk which are these in these trades. And that is why we believe that risk infrastructure is something which has to be democratized so that small businesses can actually come and participate in that, a de-risking ecosystem where all this data is available. India is doing great work in that. They are building something which is domestically addressing this. They have built a ONDC system where a lot of producers can connect into. They can share information about who the producer is, what kind of production he does, where the stock is there. So warehousing systems are getting connected to the same infrastructure, providing these capabilities, and that is why it becomes so critical for us to understand that the risk ability for the participants to come together to share the risk together will be totally dependent on the amount of data which is being available for these participants to come and to extract from this ecosystem. And that is why we are also building one of the platforms which allows this to happen. One seamless space where everybody can connect and get access to data so that they can participate in these complex transactions, which very, very difficult to execute when it comes to small producers trying to export, or small SME importers based out of Europe who are trying to buy goods from Vietnam or Indonesia or India, where they face a lot of challenges, and also to fund these transactions. Access to finance is a big question, and that is primarily because of the fact that this data is unavailable, and that's why it becomes so crucial, to have a very strong risk infrastructure which can go across borders. It's portable in nature, so that different institutions can come plug and play into the system, allowing more trade to go mainstream than it is happening now.
So would you then say that traceability alone is enough to improve market access, or do you need to combine it with financial and commercial intelligence? How do you view that, and how do you execute on that?
So basically, even if we look at traceability, it is still very, I would say, in a very early stages of understanding what the scope of traceability is. If you ask in a very simple language, traceability is always about product moving from one place to another. But there are elements of intelligence which are required to be embedded into this, which means that it's not only about the product, how it is traveling from one place to another, but how it's getting verified. What is kind of quality? What are the changes in quality which is happening to the product as it moves from one location to another? The elements regarding counterparties who are actually who are transacting these. Who are present in the supply chain and changing ownership of the product as it is moving. So that also is a very important component of traceability, which doesn't get recognized. Traceability is always, related to the movement of the product, but then this also becomes a very critical aspect of how the product is moving, because it's changing hands as it moves between multiple traders, multiple counterparties, from the producer up to the consumer. And the third thing I would say within the traceability is the aspect of the element of the financial nature of financial data which is flowing in these transactions, of how payments have been done, what prices have changed. The aspect of value chain which is also embedded into the supply chain also is a part of traceability. So traceability at this point of time, I think it probably is in the early stages, but as we believe that traceability will actually bring in the three silos which we discussed before to come together into one, so they can show the changes in the product as it moves from the producer to consumer. It shows about the financial transactions and the value changes as they happen as the product moves, and also it also shows what kind of counterparties are involved in this and what kind of margins they make as the product moves from one place to another, which also would allow a lot of disintermediation to happen. A lot of farmers or producers who want to export lose substantial amount of margin because of the intermediaries which are there, because they can't handle that risk. Today, if you look at an exporter based out of South Asia or exporter in Africa who wants to export the products, let's say to Latin America, or would like to send to Asia, they're scared they will not get paid. The payment risk is one of the biggest risks the exporter faces. Mm-hmm. And the other side of the buyers who are scared that if they go and they engage into a transaction, they don't know what kind of product they're going to get from the other end. So both the sides actually need some sort of traceability and history in that traceability which is there, which they can access in form of data and underwrite or mitigate the risks which are there in these transactions. So traceability is a much bigger aspect, but then obviously it has to be inbuilt into that ecosystem, which again connects back to our earlier, your earlier question regarding the risk infrastructure, because everything goes there, and that is where it allows all these stakeholders to come together.
Thank you, Azam. And Misha, I'm curious to hear whether you agree or have something to add, and as well as how do you see how whether, so you talked about the good data in your first statement, and digital marketplaces should rely on trusted information, right? So how do organizations then ensure the data they're using is accurate and reliable?
Well, I think I want to start again with the value stream, because if you understand what happens, who's involved in what's happening, what data gets generated, and how that data could be verified, then you get closer to a point of actually being able to see that the data is verified, that it's true what it says, and then you can move forward. So I want to connect there with what Azam had said, is that the whole automation or flow of between silos is about transparency. Because if I trust what you tell me, then I can pass that on into how I make my decisions. So that always comes back to verified information. So how do we verify information? There's different databases that you could dive into. So if I say I'm a producer of X, and this is my business registration. So know your business, KYC, KYB. Bring that into play, which means that there is an external verification of data. And for me, that's quite an interesting pathway that one could follow is when you move from low trust to higher trust. What are the elements that you would need to feed into that? And I wish I could project things because I've got some beautiful infographics that I create because I'm a visual person. I remember pictures a lot better than I remember a paragraph. But the whole idea is if we could say that start with it's producing anything, whether you're in a service space or whether you're in a product space or in an agri space, it all contains information or AKA data. And if I could make sure my data is the correct data, then we start with building that trust bridge between different players. And that then comes from if I'm exporting to somebody in another continent, how do I know they will pay? If I can do a know your business verification of such a person, then already there's an improved level of trust that I can send my produce across because that person or that business have been verified as they are trustworthy and so on. So it's quite a big ecosystem that one needs to look at when you really unpack it from the point that you receive the seed. If I go back to a previous speaker, Nicolette Zwart, whom I work with closely, if we know that this is a good seed, right up to when it produces enough tomatoes from that seed plant or seed that became a plant that produces good tomatoes, now we could follow it through. And the first point of that seed was we knew where it was produced or what the seed, the genetics of the seed was, right up to the point that it gets into a box and it gets sent up somewhere, and that's where your blockchain then comes in quite nicely to help you with that information flow. Some time ago, we did a fantastic project with in the aquaculture space with a very rare product that was produced. The seed gets harvested in Canada, and then these little animals get grown in. They first go into little school, then middle school, then high school, different cages or boxes that they grow in. And then eventually they get couriered to the different markets in very specialized traveling. Speaking about business class traveling, but they travel very well cared for. And we actually created a system that could follow them between Internet of Things, between RFT, what do you call the thing when the radio signals pick up where a product is, and blockchain, where we could then follow this product right to when it was delivered at the final destination, which usually was a restaurant, and then the consumer could take a QR code and read the full story of where this product came from, and along the way, to make sure that whatever gets put on the blockchain is the true point, then we had verifications alongside it. So that's, I think, your question of what makes for the good data, or how do you verify that something is good data? You start with the basics. Do you say you are who you are? Are you doing what you're doing? And then it develops from that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the whole point, right? If we look at these transparent supply chains, is a lot of data is being collected already for decades. Like it's not necessarily anything new, but the question is who has actually also access to what kind of information and where is opportunity to, I mean, to just say like this, to manipulate maybe information, right? So I think that's where this question also was leading into, you know, like how's it accurate, but also how is it reliable?
Well, I hope I
Dr.
answered
Sami,
the question. So, because there's so many aspects. I hope I answered the question. There's so many avenues to this.
There is no, it's all good. Dr. Sami, I'm very glad that you seem to have a stable connection now.
Yeah.
Sorry. So how can technology-driven supply chains, in your opinion, then improve transparency, traceability, and price fairness for both sides, so for producers and customers?
Yeah, well, actually, just to capitalize on what Michelle and Azam were saying, I think using GPS route optimization to reduce transportation time, fuel cost, applying what she was referring to as IoT sensors to monitor temperature, to monitor humidity during storage and transportation, using mobile applications to connect farmers with buyers, basically transport providers and financial services, implementation of digital payment system for faster and more secure transactions, because again, payment is a bigger challenge. Really, technology should be mainly to reduce the food waste, the lower logistics costs, increase supply chain, and improved customer satisfaction. In my humble opinion, I think as much as the world was moving into more globalization, I think the more now it's becoming more dependent as much as possible on a local produce, as much as possible, as feasible as possible, rather than the other way around. What if history taught us anything, especially in the last couple of years, I think there is, especially the last year, there was a U-trend from really going more global into becoming more local dependent in the best efficient manner. I don't know whether the team agrees with me, but I've seen it a lot over this region specifically.
Yeah, I think the like you said, the past few years have shown a lot what global dependencies have brought us, but also we have created these very, very long supply chains, right? Like Michelle was saying, there's a seed produced in Canada, and then it will be planted maybe, I don't know, somewhere in Italy, and it's going to be consumed in Dubai. So
Yeah.
we just have these like very, very long supply chains, and now going towards total locality, I think also a new type of challenge.
Yeah, one more thing. I think just from even government's perspective, now most governments are really focused more on food security and safety. So their main focus really is to ensure at least the necessities are there all the time, all year round. Due to anything that could go wrong, really. Of course, there are lots of countries which have interdependence, but there are lots of countries who can be dependent and who are becoming more and more dependent as time passes.
Mm-hmm. And Jian, going back to the companies that you work with, which are early startups,
yes.
How can new trading startups use the transparency or digital e-commerce platforms to prove their reliability early on? So how do you put that into practice, Jian?
Actually, working in a newly established company, a trading company, when you are a new kid on the block, trust is your most valuable currency. Producers want to know their harvest or their products will be handled properly, and buyers want to know the food stuff is safe and authentic. So since we don't have a 10-year track record yet, we lean heavily on transparency. We plan to use e-commerce and digital communication tools to give our future partners real-time visibility into where their products are. So by being open about our processes, providing clear documentation, and using digital platforms to keep communication seamless, a brand new startup can actually provide a more attentive and reliable experience. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen. And let's move a bit towards the end of our discussion and talk about the future trends and what's upcoming. And as producers in I think all around the world nowadays actually have digital tools available, like from connectivity to payments and like as we talked about the key elements of traceability. But we still see a gap between verified producer and a live export order, with financing still takes like months to close sometimes. So what is the real bottleneck that you see, and that also goes a little bit in the elaboration you had earlier on, like what is the real bottleneck and what is the agri fintech maybe getting wrong currently still? So how do you see that developing?
Yeah. So basically, if you look from a perspective of the trading, there are two elements there. One is the transactional element, which is trade itself, and then you have the financial element, which is a funding of the transaction. On one side, we have got these platforms, agri-trade platforms, which have come in, and they address a very specific need which is required to address between the buyer and the seller. Is basically, you can say, business matching, price discovery, get this thing sorted out, and connect these two guys to actually get into a transaction and engage and execute a transaction. But what is missed out is the fact that every transaction which goes into cross border is a long working capital cycle engagement cycle transaction. Whether it's a buyer who engages his working capital, whether it's a seller who engages his working capital, in case it's an open account transaction where no financial instruments are involved, either of these two parties will have to engage their working capital to make this transaction executionable. Price is right, product is right, counterparties have been checked. The most important thing which drives the transaction post that is the financing capability of the two parties. And that's why we see very less small businesses are being able to export directly into international markets. And we see very less importers, which are there in highly food insecure markets, being able to buy produce at competitive prices from mainstream, international markets. So you have one aspect, which is the trade aspect, and then you have the finance aspect, and you have all these fintechs which have come in, the financial institutions, who come in from a purely financial perspective and say that I would like to vet. First, I would like to underwrite this transaction based on the credit risk which is there in this transaction. Primarily, most of these fintechs and financial institutions would look at credit risk and look at that, how do we go and underwrite it. We use some kind of an insurance tool there to address the credit risk which is there in the transaction, and then only we can fund this transaction. Now, this kind of a strategy works good when the counterparties or the borrowers are larger in nature. Let's say middle-sized companies and larger, because they have strong balance sheets. But when it comes to SMEs, this approach doesn't work, because they don't have strong financial statements. They don't have underlying transactional data. Both of these things which hamper a financial institution's capability to underwrite the risk which is there in the transaction. And that is why we see the access to finance when it comes to SME, especially on the cross-border export or import, is very low. And I would say predominantly this aspect of being two different silos is of how fintechs and how agri-techs, which are primarily focused on doing the trade transactions, working separately, not working together, creates this gap which is there in the market. Asian Development Bank, World Bank, everybody has come up and told, there's a huge amount of the $3 trillion worth of trade finance gap is there. But then how do we address this gap? There has to be a way of being able to bring large amounts of transactions into one single place where the information becomes so easily accessible to financial institutions and to these trade platforms to use it to execute and run these transactions at not only competitive cost, but also make them operate at speed. And that is why one very important element which I think I would like to address here is that the new technologies like tokenization can help in a much better way, where real physical assets which are under movement either in warehouses or in case they are on vessels, they can be converted into tokens. Tokens give with the embedded legality can offer very strong value for financial institutions to come in and take these tokens into escrow accounts to fund them against trades which are underlying these physical assets as they move or they are stored, as well as also allow engaging parties to exchange tokens to trade. And that is something where we see a lot of value. And that is one of the areas where we see a kind of I would say amalgamation of technologies like AI, blockchain, and IoT is going to happen. All these AI abilities will help us to number crunch, to acquire data which is either present or not present, by acquiring patterns which are there in data, and use all that data in a much more effective manner. On the other side, we'll have these IoT sensors which are able to provide the conditions of the product as it is moving, and a lot of traceability elements of data. There's a long discussion we can have on that, but acquiring that data direct from origin and embedding into a token. So which means that the token will have all this embedded data, with the financial institution, once it acquires it, it not only gets access to data, but also legal rights of enforceability to the underlying asset in case, let's say, a default would happen. And that is what is actually required to be done. With the banks and the financial institutions have to move from a credit evaluation perspective, credit underwriting perspective, to more inventory and more on trade-related aspects of looking at the underlying asset and underwriting the trade, which allow a lot of this technologies to get into mainstream. It happened with blockchain. Many years back, 10 years back, blockchain came and everybody told it's a failed technology because it didn't find any application in mainstream transactions. Now, as we have progressed over time, we came back again and we told blockchain has got a great application in traceability, and we can do that. But when Starbucks came out and they did a pilot project in Mexico or in Guatemala on the coffee, which was presented in form of a QR code to the consumer didn't find any value in that. The consumer was not willing to pay a premium. Finally, what matters is in this business is the consumer willing to pay a premium for technology or the value solution which you are providing to them. In case he does, then it's a valuable technology. And that is what we believe, that today tokenization, if it is put in a right way, it can actually be a valuable piece of technology which can offer both the credible value to all the stakeholders which engage into these kind of complex trades, as well as government institutions and financial institutions who want to become participant in these trades but cannot do now because of dearth of legal tools or enforceability, as well as data which is lacking in this space. So coming to, I don't know whether I answered your question in full, but the idea was that this two separate things of how agri-techs and fintechs are looking at executing their piece of the story, their piece of the transaction, actually disallows a lot of trade not to happen. And we have to bring them together. That is, the trade and finance has to come together. Then only we will see a lot of transactionability, which is not there at this point of time, especially for small businesses, I would say.
Thank you, Arzam. And I think, to summarize, I think the tokenization brought it, that was the core of the question. So yes, you answered it. And looking forward to, as you said, that follow-up discussion. Sami, you were talking a bit about post-harvest losses earlier. So looking ahead, how can agricultural logistics systems be redesigned to reduce those losses while ensuring producers gain direct and timely access to customers?
Yeah, well, actually, agricultural logistics should focus on speed, efficiency, market accessibility. These are, and connectivity. These can be achieved by really establishing collection centers close to the farms where producers are sorted, graded, and packed. This will help a lot into that. Plus, in lots of cases, you need to invest in cold chain infrastructure, such as refrigerated storage and transport for perishable products specifically. Also, using digital platform that connects farmers directly with buyers, reducing dependence on intermediary would help a lot. One of the biggest challenge today is the intermediaries. And within these intermediaries, you would need lots of verifications. Also optimizing transportation through route planning and real-time tracking to reduce delays. All this while encouraging the farmers cooperative to aggregate all these farmers, all these produce from all over the same region. These improvements definitely would reduce costs, would have a better bargaining power, would shorten delivery time, and will increase farmers' income through all these actions.
Thank you very much. That was a great wrap up. And finally, Michelle, I wanted to hear from you. If we're looking ahead, What will distinguish, in your opinion, the most successful agriculture supply chains over the next 5 years? And
I want
hope
to.
you're not frozen.
Yes, can I speak? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. I want to just step back to the previous conversation to where one of the speakers said, throw away the textbooks and the history books. I pretty much subscribe to it. Whenever we do processes, we actually work with the people who are in the process. And quite often, the farmer already knows the shortcuts, the better ways of doing things, the means to move forward. And I think that's the thread in this whole conversation is different pieces of the value stream needs to connect. And I share what I know. I say, this is my problem. You see my problem from your point of view and from my point of view, and together we can get to the next phase. So for me, the main thing is understand what happens and then start having the conversations about where can we remove the barriers. And technology is a tool. You bring it in when it's needed. But in the end, it's people that needs to say, this is a problem. I think I can solve it this way. Can you meet me halfway? Let's make a plan and move to the next issue. So for me, it's really about collaboration and understanding the full picture and having transparency around it for everyone in that value stream.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Those were, like all of you, great final statements to wrap up the session. And I think, yeah, like you said, and then I think we heard it over the day too, is that a lot of these data points have been collected for a long time. We have very long supply chains. We're now looking more into how can we localize better, but then also what if the data points are actually essential, which ones are useful, and how do we, like you just said, Michelle, how do we connect them in the most optimal way so that each player within the supply chain has the data they need, the data to improve the processes, and to make this whole system more, I guess, equitable and fair and also sustainable in the long run. So thank you so much, Azam, Sami, Michelle, and Gian, for joining me here today on the afternoon of technical difficulties. It was a great pleasure, and I hope we can all see each other next year in person again in Dubai. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.